Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking a look at some really insightful source material, breaking it all down to give you the essential knowledge you need to be well informed and spiritually prepared. And we are starting a journey today. A spiritual pilgrimage, really, that begins in a place that maybe is a little surprising. It starts in a place of real difficulty.
It does.
We're opening up the Psalms, specifically Psalm 120. This is the one that really kicks off an entire collection.
That is exactly right. We're focusing on the very first Song of Ascents. And this whole discussion is structured from some really comprehensive teaching material that's been supplied by the Faith in Jesus team.
Right.
And they highlight this psalm as a kind of tactical guide. It's a prayer, but it's a very focused prayer from someone in, intense difficulty. It really offers a roadmap for any believer who feels like they're under siege by a hostile world.
So our mission today is to go, beyond just a surface reading. We want to pull out those clear, profound insights, and I think most importantly, the practical, actionable steps.
Yes.
Steps for navigating a world that uses one particular weapon against us over and over again. The weapon of words, of slander, and of deceit.
And the material we have really illuminates that. It gives us the historical and spiritual context so we can grasp why this psalm, this specific one, was chosen to start the whole Pilgrim sequence.
We're structuring this for the learner who really wants a thorough knowledge, but wants it quickly without getting bogged down. We're aiming for those aha moments, those points of clarity about spiritual endurance and the pursuit of peace, especially when conflict just feels like it's everywhere.
Exactly.
So let's start with the framework of the psalm itself, the whole context of the ascent. This is where the sort of physical reality of the journey becomes this perfect metaphor for the spiritual life.
It really is.
If you look in the King James Version, the title for Psalm 120 is A Song of Degrees. But there's another translation that I think has more immediate weight for us, and that's A Song of Ascents. So what is the significance there? Why does that title set the tone for the next, 15 Psalms?
Well, that title is everything. It's the foundation for the whole collection. Psalms 120 all the way through 134, they form a very special liturgy. They were specifically the songs that were sung by Hebrew pilgrims as they were literally traveling or ascending up toward Jerusalem.
So you have to picture it. Jerusalem is high up in the Judean hills.
Right.
So no matter where you start from, it is always an uphill climb to get to the holy city.
It's always an ascent. And that physical action, that steady upward climb, it just immediately resonates. It implies effort. It implies sweat and just persistent forward motion.
And this wasn't just a casual vacation trip.
No, not at all. Our source material from the Faith in Jesus team really highlights that this ascent was a mandated religious duty. It ties directly back to the law, specifically to Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 16.
Okay.
And that verse commands this really difficult, required pilgrimage. It says, 3 times in a year shall all thy males appear before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose, in the feast of unleavened bread, and in the feast of weeks, and in the feast of tabernacles, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty.
Wow. So every faithful male had to make this physically grueling trek 3 times a year for these huge feasts.
Right.
This wasn't a one-off hike. This was a long-distance, repetitive, and I imagine often dangerous journey. You're going through rugged terrain. It could take days, maybe even weeks, depending on where you were coming from.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the practical side of it. The heat, the dust, just the fatigue of traveling with your whole family, your neighbors, you're carrying provisions, and there's this constant threat of robbers or, hostile tribes along the way.
So arduous is probably an understatement.
It is. The physical experience of leaving home and committing to that gradual, often painful climb that defines the emotional state of the person who is singing Psalm 120.
And that physical climb gives us the perfect framework for our own spiritual pilgrimage. The commentary we have explains that so clearly. Our spiritual walk with God, it always parallels that ascent.
It begins in a difficult spot,
Right.
a low place of distress, as they put it. You're far from your ultimate destination, which for us is our heavenly home.
Right.
And the essential spiritual point is this. The pilgrim is already burdened. They're feeling the pressures of life, the pressures of the journey itself, but they are committed to moving up. They're facing reality.
I think that's such a crucial point for you to grasp.
Yeah.
We often wish our spiritual journey started on some mountaintop of ease, But this psalm says no, the pilgrimage begins in a low place. It starts in a spot of recognized need.
Exactly.
We start by looking up for help, not by looking around proudly at what we've already done.
Precisely. The starting point of Psalm 120 really mirrors the starting point of genuine faith. The singer is dealing with these complex, confining problems, but their heart and their hopes are fixed on God and His holy city. It's the music of someone who is burdened, but they are refusing to give up that upward path.
So that gives us the whole narrative for our discussion today. It's the thread that ties all these verses together. The ascent requires us to continuously shed burden so we can keep climbing.
Yes, the weight of fear, the weight of vengeance, the weight of isolation, all these things will stop a pilgrim right in their tracks.
That structure is vital. The pilgrimage itself becomes this act of transformation that happens on the journey as you identify and drop those burdens.
And this first song just captures the exact feeling of someone who is burdened but also committed. It's the prayer of a weary traveler who knows the journey has to continue, and the very first burden to drop is the weight of present fear.
That makes perfect sense. And knowing that the ascent begins in struggle, that recognition has to lead you to the only way forward.
A cry for help.
A desperate cry for help, which is exactly what we see in the psalmist's immediate personal testimony. So let's start with the scripture itself. This first verse is short, but its placement right at the beginning of the Songs of Ascent makes it so foundational. Could you give us the King James version of this crucial first verse?
Of course. The pilgrim starts right here. He's establishing the bedrock of how he responds to conflict. It's Psalm 120, verse 1. In my distress I cried unto the Lord, and He heard me.
What's so striking to me right away is that he doesn't open with a complaint about his current problem.
No.
He begins with this declaration of faith that's rooted firmly in his past experience. That's a very deliberate choice, right? It's designed to build spiritual momentum for the climb ahead.
It's the absolute opposite of panic. He
Yeah.
sets his foundation immediately by just cataloging God's past faithfulness. He's not wasting any time saying, oh, look at this giant mountain of problems I have now. He's saying, I know how this works, because the last time I was at my lowest point, God delivered me.
Let's define that core word, distress. What does the Hebrew word tell us that maybe gets a little lost in the English translation?
With the root word, Sarah, it literally means tight or confined or narrow. The commentary from the You Need Faith in Jesus team describes it as a tight, confined, and pressuring situation.
So it's like being squeezed.
Exactly. It implies being squeezed or even crushed with no obvious way out. It's not a minor annoyance. It's a situation that feels spiritually claustrophobic. It's crushing.
So the psalmist is starting his climb from this narrow, almost suffocating place. And what was his immediate, unscripted response to that feeling?
He remembers this wholehearted, desperate appeal. I cried unto the Lord. This wasn't some passive, beautifully composed prayer.
Right.
This was a desperate, primal, full-throated cry to the only one who could possibly get him out of that tight spot. It's the definition of turning from self-reliance to total divine dependence.
And the response, which is the most powerful part of this whole statement, is, and he heard me. That word heard carries a lot of weight here, doesn't it?
It really does. Our sources stress that this phrase means so much more than just God being aware of the sound. It means God listened with intent. He intervened, and crucially, He answered.
So the testimony is simple, but the remembered result is life-altering. God is active. He delivers.
And this act of remembering, of cataloging God's response, it sets the immediate psychological and spiritual groundwork for facing the next challenge, which might even be harder than the last one.
This is really the foundational principle of faith. We see this pattern over and over in Scripture. I'm thinking of Psalm 34.
Yes, Psalm 34, verse 6 perfectly reinforces this. It says, this poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all his troubles.
The link is undeniable. The pilgrim starts his climb by reminding himself that the God who answered that poor man's cry then is the exact same God who hears his cry now. He is unchanging.
And therefore, the burden of fear is the first thing that gets shed. The pilgrim isn't moving forward based on, just wishful thinking. He's moving forward on a certainty that is born of history.
So let's translate this into a really practical step for you, the listener. If you are in distress right now, that tight, confined, pressuring situation, what is the first action you have to take based on this verse?
The first step is conscious recall. And I'd even say documentation. You have to actively stop the spiral of your current anxiety and force your mind back to the history of God's faithfulness to you.
So you actually catalog the times God has helped you before.
You do. It's an act of spiritual discipline. It's like reaching for a proven tool instead of flailing around.
Like creating a personal list of stones of remembrance. So when the pressure is on, you don't look at the size of the current threat. You review the size of the previous deliverance.
Exactly. The commentary really emphasizes that this conscious, active memory of God's past faithfulness is the most powerful weapon against present fear. This practice, it builds your faith, it gives you the confidence to cry out again, and it establishes the truth that God is not only capable of answering, but he is faithful to listen.
So the fear is shed because the track record proves the deliverer is reliable.
That's it.
And with that solid foundation now established, the pilgrim is ready to identify the precise nature of his current struggle. And this is a surprising pivot. The pressure wasn't, lions or thirst on the road. It was something far more subtle.
The pilgrim starts by dropping the burden of fear, but now he has to face the burden of an external attack. And the attack, shockingly, is verbal.
This is where it gets so relatable for us today. We often think great spiritual distress has to involve, a physical trial or financial collapse. But here, the source of that crushing, confined feeling, it's the most widespread weapon in the human arsenal.
It's the tongue.
It's the tongue.
The enemy isn't a visible army. It's subtle, it's venomous, and it's always operating in the shadows. The distress is caused by words, slander, lies, deceit.
And the text makes that explicit.
Yes. Let's quote the verse that reveals the cause. It's Psalm 120, verse 2. Deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips and from a deceitful tongue.
So the pilgrim is basically saying the slander, the lies being spoken about me, that's what's making me feel so crushed. My whole being is under attack.
And the emphasis on the target is critical. He says, deliver my soul. He understood this verbal assault not as petty gossip, but as a direct attack on his very soul, his reputation, his integrity, his inner peace, his ability to thrive.
Right.
Words, especially calculated lies, have this destructive power that can sometimes be more lasting than physical violence.
In the ancient world, reputation was everything. Lies could strip you of your business, your standing, your security faster than any robber could. And even today, lies spread online or in an office can shatter a career. They can crush a person's ability to function.
It's psychological warfare. It's spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
And it's waged through language.
Yeah.
And it is exhausting. So the very request for deliverance, deliver my soul, is an admission of his own inability to fight it.
He can't possibly track down every whisper, refute every subtle lie.
He can't. He knows he can't defend himself against the deceitful tongue that just operates in darkness. So he steps back and says, this defense is bigger than me. I need divine intervention to rescue me from this maze of lies.
And that plea for rescue, it gives so much assurance to the believer because his prayer lines up perfectly with God's own moral standard. We know, based on our sources from the You Need Faith in Jesus team, that God hates the destructive use of words.
He does, and we have scriptural reinforcement for that.
Where do we see that?
Well, the commentary points us directly to the wisdom literature, which confirms that when you pray against lies, you are aligned with God's heart. We can look at Proverbs chapter 12, verse 22. It says, lying lips are abomination to the Lord, but they that deal truly are his delight.
Abomination. That is not a weak word.
Not at all.
It confirms that when we pray against those who use lies to tear us down, we are praying in perfect alignment with God's own nature. And that's a huge source of comfort when you feel like you're fighting this battle all alone.
The assurance is that you are on God's side in this battle. And this is so important because our immediate human instinct when we're slandered is usually to pick up the exact same weapon.
Oh yeah, you want to retaliate. You want to aggressively defend yourself. Maybe even start exposing the flaws of the person who's lying about you.
That is the natural urge. And it's why so many spiritual pilgrimages just stall out right here.
Yeah.
The spiritual path, as taught by this material, it demands the opposite action. You have to resist that urge to get into a verbal mudslinging contest.
Because once you do that, you've stopped your upward ascent. You're just entangled in the fight down below.
Precisely. So the practical step is not to pick up a matching weapon, but to hand the entire defense operation over to God. You bring the hurt, the confusion, the defense directly to the Lord. You entrust the fight, the vindication, and the timing of it all completely to him.
That requires so much spiritual restraint and trust, especially in a world that praises the quick clap back and aggressive self-defense.
It does.
This psalm is calling us to a different, higher battle strategy, one that focuses on staying clean for the climb.
It demands the pilgrim focus their energy on the ascent, not the endless skirmish on the valley floor. And having prayed for deliverance, the psalmist isn't passive. He actually acknowledges, even anticipates, what fate awaits that deceitful tongue.
And this transition lets him shed the second major burden, which is the weight of vengeance.
Yes.
This is where the language gets incredibly graphic. It's intentionally terrifying. The pilgrim, now that he's handed his defense over to God, he addresses the false tongue directly. It's almost prophetic.
It's a profound rhetorical challenge. He's speaking to this force of evil, reminding it that it's not above the law. Let's look at the question he poses and then the answer that details the divine judgment.
Okay.
First, the question of Psalm 120, verse 3. What shall be given unto thee? Or what shall be done unto thee, thou false tongue?
And then the immediate, visceral, and terrifying answer follows.
The answer is right in the next verse. It gives us this imagery of immediate and enduring destruction. Psalm 120, verse 4. Sharp arrows of the mighty with coals of juniper.
We have to analyze this imagery because it's so rich with cultural meaning. Let's start with the first part. Sharp arrows of the mighty.
Sharp arrows of the mighty. That signifies a judgment that is swift, it's precise, and it's utterly deadly. The mighty here implies a divine warrior god himself, who is a skilled archer.
So an arrow shot by an expert can't miss its target.
It can't. It suggests that while our own attempts at defense might be clumsy or slow, God's justice will be piercing and inescapable. It's a perfect mirror of the crime, isn't it? The words shot out by the malicious tongue are met by arrows shot out by the divine.
But let me raise the question that I think frustrates a lot of believers. If God is so keen on justice, why do we see people who spread lies and deceit seem to thrive for years, even decades? How does the pilgrim reconcile that slow pace of justice with the urgency of their distress?
And that is the essential psychological burden the pilgrim has to shed. The answer isn't just in the arrow's swiftness, but in the certainty and the quality of the justice. The arrow ensures the judgment hits its mark, but it's the second image that confirms its endurance.
Okay, so let's get to that second image. Coals of juniper. What's the cultural detail here that the commentary from the You Need Faith in Jesus team provides?
This is fascinating. This is charcoal made from the broom tree. And the significance is very specific. This charcoal was renowned in ancient Israel, not just for burning hot, but for retaining its deep, penetrating heat for an extraordinarily long time. Shepherds and travelers prized it because it would provide this slow, steady warmth long after other woods had turned to ash.
So this isn't a quick flash of punishment. It's a penetrating, enduring heat. It symbolizes a judgment that lingers.
Correct. The punishment for a lying tongue is not fleeting, because the harm caused by slander is not fleeting. The punishment fits the crime. Just as those broom tree coals penetrate deep and maintain their heat, the judgment will be deep and maintained.
So that's what offers the victim solace. Even if the consequence here on earth seems delayed, the ultimate consequence is guaranteed.
And that is the spiritual permission to let go of vengeance. The certainty of that sharp arrow and the coals of juniper allows the pilgrim to shed that heavy baggage and keep climbing without being weighed down by personal bitterness.
And this ancient imagery, it connects directly to the New Testament's warnings about unchecked speech.
It does. The New Testament picks up this exact theme of the tongue's destructive power and connects it explicitly to divine fire.
Where do we find that parallel?
We see it most vividly in James chapter 3, verse 6. The Apostle James is addressing the church directly, and he says, "And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire of hell."
Wow. That is a direct and terrifying connection back to the coals of juniper. The destructive power of the tongue, the gossip, the slander. It's a fire started by hell itself. And it is fittingly met with God's purifying, enduring fire.
It confirms that the seriousness of the psalmist's complaint is taken with equal, ultimate seriousness by God across all of Scripture.
So let's bring this back to a practical application. What are the dual warnings and comforts this imagery provides for you, the listener, today?
Well, first, there's a sobering warning for self-reflection. We have to recognize the seriousness of our own speech. This imagery isn't just about the enemy out there, it's a critical internal mirror.
Right.
If we're praying for God to judge the lying lips of others, we have to ensure our own are guarded, knowing that the righteous judge holds all of us accountable for our words.
That self-examination is non-negotiable for the pilgrim.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But secondly, this imagery offers profound comfort to those who have been deeply wounded by lies. It serves as a stark reminder that God sees. He measures the harm. He's the ultimate arbiter, and his justice, swift as an arrow, enduring as juniper coals, will ultimately prevail.
And that certainty frees us from the need to personally execute vengeance.
Exactly. We drop the burden of vengeance and we keep moving.
So, having surrendered the fear and the fight for justice, the pilgrim now confronts the emotional reality of their environment. The focus shifts from the action of the enemy to the long, weary duration of the conflict.
That isolation, that spiritual loneliness, it's the natural, inevitable result of enduring this kind of hostility.
Now, the psalmist expresses this cry of deep spiritual alienation. He feels like a complete foreigner, not just physically distant from Jerusalem, but morally distant from the people all around him. He's living in a territory that is fundamentally hostile to his faith.
And he gives this emotion a physical address, which is remarkable. He connects his internal misery to external geography. Let's look at the verse, Psalm 120, verse 5. Woe is me that I sojourn in Mesech, that I dwell in the tents of Kedar.
Woe is me. That cry of misery is immediate. But Mesech and Kedar, these names are almost mythological to a modern ear. What did they symbolize to an Israelite pilgrim making that climb?
They're symbolic shorthand for utter spiritual opposition and alienation. Mesech refers to a remote foreign people, maybe associated with modern-day Turkey or the Black Sea region.
So far away.
Very far away. To an Israelite, Mesech symbolized the godless, uncivilized, distant corners of the world, a culture that was utterly removed from and indifferent to the laws of God. It represents a cold, distant apathy.
Okay, so that's Mesech. What about Kedar?
Kedar was different. Kedar was a well-known, nomadic, warlike Arab tribe from the Arabian desert. They were famous for their tents and for their aggressive, volatile nature. So Kedar symbolized close, active, aggressive opposition, paganism and continuous hostility right on your border.
So by saying he's sojourning in Mesech and dwelling in the tents of Kedar, he's expressing that he is spiritually living in a place that is simultaneously indifferent, like Mesech, and aggressive, like Kedar, towards his faith.
He's surrounded by both hostile action and moral distance, and that perfectly encapsulates the misery of being a believer today. You might be surrounded by indifference in one area of your life, a community that just doesn't care about truth or holiness. That's your Mesech.
And at the same time,
You're dealing with direct, active hostility in another area, maybe a toxic workplace or a vicious social media thread. That's your Kedar. The pain is that he feels like an alien in his own life.
And that feeling is absolutely the universal believer's experience. The New Testament confirms this is what we should expect.
It does. The Apostle Peter confirms this in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11. He's speaking directly to believers and says, Dearly beloved, I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul.
Strangers and pilgrims.
Our citizenship is elsewhere. We're pilgrims making an ascent to a different home. So feeling like a stranger, like you're dwelling in Mesech, that's not a sign that you're doing something wrong.
It's actually a sign that you're doing something right.
It's evidence that your heart is rightly focused on your true home, which is upstream. The guidance from the You Need Faith in Jesus team emphasizes that this feeling of alienation is an expected and essential part of the pilgrimage.
Now, the next verse deepens this suffering. It shows the weariness caused not just by the hostility, but by its sheer duration. This isn't just a quick visit to the tents of Kedar, it's a long, settled period of conflict.
And this is a crucial addition that speaks directly to our need for spiritual endurance. It's Psalm 120, verse 6. My soul hath long dwelt with him that hateth peace.
Long dwelt. That phrase speaks to a deep, chronic, settled weariness. This opposition hasn't been a week-long spat. It's an environmental stressor that has taken a severe emotional and spiritual toll.
And the opposition isn't just passive disagreement. It is active hatred of a fundamental divine concept, peace. And we have to pause here to really define that word peace. In Hebrew, it's shalom.
Shalom, which is so much richer than just our modern idea of peace as the absence of war.
So much richer. Shalom means wholeness, completeness, well-being, harmony, prosperity, reconciliation. The pilgrim is surrounded by people who fundamentally hate shalom. They thrive on strife, on discord, on destruction, on fragmentation. They oppose the very way of God.
They are committed to conflict as a way of life, which perfectly mirrors the hostility that Christ warned his followers to expect.
Jesus prepared his disciples for this exact weariness. In John chapter 15, verse 18, he says, If the world hate you, ye know that it hated me before it hated you. The world, by its nature, is opposed to the Prince of Peace, and so it will oppose those who bear his name and pursue his values.
This gives so much validation to you, the listener, if you're feeling that deep, settled weariness, that long-term, low-grade hostility in a difficult marriage or a dysfunctional family or a toxic job. You're exhausted because you are dealing with people who fundamentally hate shalom.
And that validation is the comfort of this verse. It reminds you that God sees and understands the emotional toll this hostile environment takes on your soul. The exhaustion is legitimate.
And this allows the pilgrim to shed the burden of isolation.
Yes. So the practical step here isn't to pretend the conflict doesn't exist or to try and change the world overnight. It's to shift your perspective on the hostility itself. You recognize that long-term hostility is an expected, defining part of the pilgrimage.
So you accept the weariness not as a personal failure, but as proof that you are remaining distinct from the spirit of Meshech and Kedar.
Exactly. And you take comfort that God sees the duration and understands its depth. This acceptance allows you to endure the longed well faithfully, which leads us right to the final verse, the necessary conclusion for a spiritual pilgrim, the painful dilemma of the peacemaker.
This last verse just encapsulates the deep frustration of the pilgrim who has done everything right. They've shed their fear, they've surrendered their vengeance, they've accepted their exile, and they are still actively seeking good, only to be aggressively pushed back.
It's the perfect, painful summary of trying to live faithfully among those who hate shalom. Let's read the verse that concludes the psalm. It's Psalm 120, verse 7. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war.
I am for peace. I mean, that is a clear, unambiguous declaration of the pilgrim's core character, his intention. He wants reconciliation. He wants harmony. He's making a proactive effort to communicate.
But the moment he speaks, the moment he tries dialogue or compromise, his peaceful words are immediately twisted. They're interpreted as weakness, or they're used as new leverage for aggression. They are for war. His intentions are weaponized against him.
And that makes his situation feel totally hopeless from a human perspective. It's the heartbreaking dilemma of trying to pursue peace with someone who is dedicated to burning the bridge down.
This scenario is so common. You try to resolve a conflict, and the other person just uses your kindness or your sincerity to attack you even more. And the temptation is to just quit being a peacemaker altogether.
And that's why the Apostle Paul, later in Scripture, had to address this exact dilemma. He provides the ethical boundaries we need when our best efforts fail.
Yes. Paul's instruction is the guiding light for the modern pilgrim. You find it in Romans chapter 12, verse 18. It states, "If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men."
That verse is like the New Testament commentary on Psalm 120, verse 7. The psalmist declared, I am for peace, and Paul says, okay, pursue it relentlessly.
Relentlessly. That phrase, "as much as lieth in you," means you have to exhaust every godly, honest, ethical, and sincere avenue for reconciliation. We are responsible for 100% of our effort towards achieving shalom.
But the crucial qualifier is right at the beginning. It gives the pilgrim necessary protection and permission. It says, if it be possible.
And that is the essential acknowledgement. Sometimes, despite our absolute best efforts, harmony simply cannot be achieved because the other party remains fundamentally committed to strife. They hate shalom.
So we are only responsible for what lieth in us. We are not responsible for the destructive, warlike reaction of the other person.
And that distinction is incredibly liberating. It prevents the peacemaker from internalizing the failure of the conflict, from falling into self-blame when hostility continues. It allows the pilgrim to shed that final burden, the responsibility for the other person's choice.
So it reframes the whole struggle.
It does. And as believers today, our calling is to be peacemakers. But when our peaceful words are met with warlike responses, we have two final crucial steps that allow us to continue the ascent without compromising our integrity.
What are those final practical actions for the listener in this no-win scenario?
First, you hold the line. You don't get discouraged, and you don't compromise your core principles, truth, integrity, holiness, just to get a superficial peace. Peace achieved through ethical compromise is not the shalom of God.
Okay.
So you continue to stand for truth and reconciliation, even if it leads to more conflict in the short term.
And second, after you've fulfilled that as much as lieth in you part, where does the focus shift?
The focus shifts entirely to hope. You entrust the cause and the result wholly to the Lord. You recognize you have fulfilled your mandate. The result of the other party's choice to choose war over peace is now solely their responsibility before God. And you look forward with hope to the return of Christ and the establishment of perfect peace in his kingdom.
That's the ultimate goal.
It's the ultimate goal, and it's the focus of the guidance derived from the spiritual resources we reviewed from the You Need Faith in Jesus team. It's the destination of the ascent, where lying lips are finally silenced by divine truth.
The pilgrimage ends not in the frustration of verse 7, but in the enduring hope for a king who will establish perfect shalom forever. This is just an incredibly rich and necessary roadmap for navigating hostility and maintaining spiritual integrity on the upward path.
To synthesize the whole journey of Psalm 120 then, We began the ascent in that low place, acknowledging distress, but we immediately used our past testimony to shed the burden of fear. We confronted the enemy, those deceitful words, and we were comforted by the certainty of divine justice, the sharp arrows and juniper coals. And that allowed us to shed the heavy burden of vengeance.
Then we acknowledge the spiritual loneliness, that weariness of long-term exile among those who hate shalom, and we shed the burden of isolation by embracing our true identity as strangers and pilgrims.
Exactly.
And finally, we accepted that difficult reality of the peacemaker's dilemma. We recognized our role is to pursue harmony proactively while trusting God entirely with the outcome. This deep dive, really powered by the thorough research and spiritual clarity of the source material, it provides not just comfort, but a clear, robust action plan for every spiritual pilgrim dealing with hostility today.
The key insight is simple, really. You can endure the conflict without becoming contaminated by it.
Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you to consider. Building on this profound analysis, Psalm 120 seems to reveal that true spiritual maturity involves not just praying for deliverance from conflict, but developing the spiritual endurance to dwell faithfully and peacefully within long-term hostility.
Hmm.
So what does it look like practically and daily for you to maintain your shalom, your wholeness, and your commitment to peace when you are surrounded by those who are actively and deliberately committed to hating it?
That's the question.
Thank you for joining us on this essential deep dive into the first Song of Ascents. We really encourage you to study these verses further, guided by the foundational work and the spiritual clarity provided by the You Need Faith in Jesus team. Until next time, keep seeking that higher ground.